Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are on the globe, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Pascal Robert. Our normal host, Jason Miles, is away on vacation for the weekend with family, taking care of his lovely son, Phoenix. To this weekend, we have a wonderful show. I'm going to be reconnecting with the place from which I got my original political roots in terms of writing and political education. My former editors at Black Agenda Report. But before we bring them on, let us first bring on our moderator du jour that we always have to recognize, who cannot be seen. She's behind the screen, but who's always here. Her voice is here. M. Toussaint. Say hello to everyone, M. Toussaint. Is M. Toussaint on the microphone? She's
Can
quiet.
you hear me?
There we go. Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share.
Thank you, thank you. And of course, our man in the DMV, who used to be our man in Maine, who is our regular weekend co-host, the one and the only Marcus from the Left Flank Vets.
Yo, what's up? What's up? What's up?
Yes.
I'm excited because
soundboard.
the cheer pretended there. Now I'm excited because these little like the Pascal Marcus, I'm excited these shows and focusing on some world politics and stuff like that. I'm really excited for what we got going on today. So we should just get into it.
So right now, let's introduce our two guests. We have the one and the only managing editor at Black Agenda Report, Margaret Kimberley. Peace, Margaret. Thank you for having you. And of course, we have the national organizer for the Black Alliance for Peace, Ajamu Baraka, former candidate for the Green Party.
Cheer, cheer, cheer. Clap, clap, clap. What's up?
So, let's get into the current events of the day. What exactly do we see on the ground right now in terms of the state of the oppositional politics we're seeing in Latin America and South America that are challenging the political status quo, since most of the Western world is stuck in this kind of dynamic worried about the reactionary right? Ajamu, I know you have inside baseball in terms of what we're seeing on the ground in Colombia because you're close up in front to the current winning vice presidential candidate. What exactly is the state of the radical left in those spheres of engagement?
Well, thank you so much for that question, and I want to talk about that. But Pascal, it'll be interesting, and because we know we only have a few minutes with Margaret, for us to maybe perhaps consider talking about what these events mean in terms of the work in the United States of America and the domestic agenda and the domestic political environment. And we could definitely make those connections because, of course, in the Black Agenda Report, the publication that Margaret is the publisher and the boss of, we cover all of that. So, I touch on very quickly that there are significant changes taking place in Latin America. But an understanding of those changes, I think, will be even more enlightening when we take a look at what they mean in the U.S. Like, for example, the failed Summit of the Americas that took place a few weeks ago. That is a reflection of the slippage of the ability of the U.S. to impose its will on politics in our region. We say our region because we want to assert the fact that we are part of the Americas. Even so-called progressives tend to forget that, and sometimes take on the standpoint, the point of view of the bourgeois hegemon in looking at events in our region, both in the Caribbean and in so-called Latin America. So, we were involved in working with the summit. So I wanted to switch over, and this is your show, and defer to Margaret.
I think that's perfect because As you pointed out, the Summit of Americas, and I think we've probably all discussed this, of where President of Mexico AMLO said in solidarity with Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, and choosing to not go, but also having the Summit for the People, which I know that Margaret, you were a large part of. So maybe kind of even describe about how those connections are being made through now the international community within the Americas to kind of fight back against American hegemony.
Thanks very much. I was not in Los Angeles for the summit, but I think it's a great place to start our conversation. The U.S. is yet again hoisted on its own petard, having declared certain countries adversaries and enemies, in this case, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. But unfortunately for the U.S., this was the turn of the U.S. to host the summit. So now they're in a position of having declared these countries terrorists, of sanctioning them, and sanctions are war. It's warfare and kills people. Sanctions kill as surely as bombs and bullets do. So then what do? Do you allow these countries to attend the summit? Well, if you were smart, you would, but they doubled down and exclude them. And the rest of the hemisphere had a lot to say before and during the event. I believe 6 countries did not attend. I can't remember all 6. I know the one in the Caribbean was St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but Mexico, I believe, Guatemala, and I'm not going to try to remember. But not only did some countries not attend, but countries that did attend quite publicly spoke to the exclusion. And journalists, the people who do the real work of journalism, asked about it, asked the Secretary of State about it, asked the man who is the chief puppet of the U.S., the Organization of American States guy. I don't like him, so I can't remember. Malgra, thank you. There was a People's Summit. Black Alliance for Peace was one of the organizations that attended. And I think it was a great opportunity for people to, as Ajamu touched on, to see themselves as part of a worldwide struggle. I think that's something that people in this country have to learn, to be not only in solidarity rhetorically with people around the world, but to be active with people around the world and to see what we have a lot to learn from people in other countries. You talked, Pascal, about the new Colombian vice president, Francia Marquez. Well, she didn't spring from nowhere, and she's not like Kamala Harris. She is the product of a very strong movement that's been in place for many years and has achieved great things. So these are things that we can all learn from. We can learn from Ecuador, where a mostly indigenous mass movement shut down the country. There was a general strike for several weeks, and they won many of their demands. So I think it's very important for us to see ourselves as a part of this, not just this hemisphere, but of the entire world. These international connections are very important.
Oh, Pascal, you're muted. At least I can't.
Margaret, you're absolutely correct in terms of the importance of making those international connections. I just had a bit of a technical issue. But I think that one thing that we have to realize also is that we have to talk about the domestic scene, because, the international and the domestic connect together. What do these international realities mean for the state of Black domestic politics in terms of the role of the Black political class? I saw an article that was really fascinating that was talking about the Congressional Black Caucuses now being directly lobbied by the good old bad guys like the Saudis, the Gulf states, and a few of those other belligerent actors for their position in terms of being able to lobby for attention from the Biden administration. Because guess who is the head of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs? Is Meeks. And Meeks now all of a sudden is in the catbird seat and being able to play his ability as, the Black political class, misleader that he is, to now get the attention of all these, bad old days, bad old guys. So how exactly does the black political class in the current domestic politics interface not only with the current state domestically of black politics, but some of these international issues as well?
Well, the black political class does what it was set up to do, to put to give buy-in to the larger ruling class, the oligarchy, in this case, the Democratic Party establishment, and to help them make the case for all of the wrongdoing they commit around in this country and around the world. So domestically, how does that work? So James Clyburn, who we're told is some kind of kingmaker, which is pretty funny, he gets more money from Big Pharma than any other member of Congress. That is an example of what they do domestically. Congressman Gregory Meeks, whose district is here in New York and Queens, is currently chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. He's a person who's not particularly astute or smart, but that works to their advantage. He just does what he's told. So he's running back and forth to Ukraine, saying Slava Ukraine, the slogan of the Ukrainian fascists. But I want to talk about this Russian malign influence legislation that he sponsored. And it's a law which requires the U.S. government to study Russia's influence, not just on the African continent, but in the African diaspora. So that means us. That means all of us sitting here and others. It is both an insult to Africans that on the continent that they are not able or allowed to have whatever alliances they want, to speak with whomever they want, to do whatever they want with whomever they want, just as the U.S. does, and to the millions of African people around the world. So this is very, very dangerous legislation. This is the Black political class and the Congressional Black Caucus acting at their very worst. And if they want to talk about Russia and Africa, I want to talk about the visit the African Union made to President Putin about a month ago. When the Ukraine crisis began and they kicked Russia out of the SWIFT system, the currency messaging system, African countries could not pay for the grain they get from Russia, from the fertilizer they get from Russia. And this is quite, for obvious reasons, a problem for them. Now, it's part of a wider phenomenon where the effort to hurt Russia has hurt countries all over the world. People are being impoverished. Europeans have hurt themselves. The U.S. has hurt itself. But the U.S. has the nerve to say that Russia can't be in the SWIFT system, which hurts African countries, and then turn around and talk about malign Russian influence in Africa. So I would sum up by saying that we have to advocate for the rights of countries all over the world to be sovereign states, to be able to do what they want with whomever they want, and to say that the U.S. does not have the right to sanction countries. Now the U.S. has sanctioned the entire world in some way or another in their futile effort to hurt Russia. So everything we were told, all these tropes about, Russia doesn't make anything, it's a gas station masquerading as a country and blah, blah, blah. What did Biden say? All they have are oil wells and nukes. Well, none of that obviously was true. And the fact that the African Union, the organization that represents African states, personally went to talk to Putin, to talk about this problem that was created by the West, is something that we have to pay attention to.
I appreciate you bringing that up. It's a piece of information that definitely needs to be put into consciousness of not only those of us on the left, but definitely communities of color. But the way in which the media is presenting this, it seems to be that the liberal narrative on all things foreign policy is dominating the consciousness of the abiding public in the United States. For example, one of the things you and I had the honor on being on Black Agenda Radio to talk to you about was the Supreme Court and the abortion decision. We're seeing the liberal framing about the Supreme Court giving exegesis to this belief that somehow we have to circle the wagons around these Democratic candidates. What exactly should be the posture of the revolutionary black left? What is your position to those who say that we aid in the bet in the rise of these reactionary court decisions because of our unwillingness to engage in some kind of popular front unification with the Democrats, if that is our position? I'd like to hear your analysis and break that down. I know we talked about that briefly, but I'd like to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, it's funny to me, not ironic, I suppose, not amusing, that the current state of the Supreme Court is entirely the fault of the Democratic Party. And they have told people over the years, even if you don't like us, you've got to vote for Democrats and protect the federal judiciary. And millions of people vote for Democrats for that reason, only for that reason. They go along with the lesser evilism argument. But what did the Democrats do? They gave up state legislatures to Republicans. They stood down. When Obama was in the White House, Democrats lost 1,000 seats across the country. Obama himself, he campaigned saying he would codify Roe v. Wade and pass legislation to protect it. What did he say after he got into office? Well, that's not my highest priority. It wasn't even a low priority for him. He had the supermajority that we're always told we need in order to get anything progressive passed, but he didn't care, and the rest of the Democratic Party didn't care either. So that was a missed opportunity. Then they let Ruth Bader Ginsburg hang around on the court. She was already 80, already had cancer. He knew they were in danger of leaving the Senate, so he tepidly asked her to step down. She didn't. He let it go. Then Scalia dies, which should be good news. But Mitch McConnell said, well, actually, by then the Republicans did have control of the Senate. They said, we're not acting on Merrick Garland's nomination. He could have made a recess appointment. He didn't. Hillary Clinton screwed up and lost the election. The 6-3 Republican majority in the Supreme Court is the fault of Democrats. And I'm hoping that people have learned a lesson. That if that was your only reason for voting for them, well, you can stop now. Although people could have stopped.
Let's not forget that the New York Times, the liberal bastion of journalism that is the mainstream status quo journalism, indicted Obama in itself and saying that he was slow to name judges and that he did not take it seriously as a priority in his first tenure as president. And that unlike Trump, who was very serious about realizing that the ability to take the court would be a nice bulwark for him to basically put the liberals in check, that Obama did not realize that importance and played right into the hands of the conservatives. So that's just another,
It's worse than that, Pascal. He does know the importance. He's a smart man. He's a lawyer. He was a law professor. Every time he did something horrible, people would say, well, he was a constitutional law professor. So he knew. He just did not care. That shows the fraudulence of Obama and the damage that he and the rest of the Democratic Party did to this country.
And I think it's important to even.
Do you want to jump in, Ajamu? Do you want to jump in and add anything here?
Well, no, I defer to Marcus.
One last thing I want to ask you about. I want to move on to Marcus, because Marcus is chomping at the bit because he wants to ask you questions.
Well, just like one extra little tidbit I wanted to add on to Marcus is just the fact that the first and fourth bills the House introduced in this Congress were around voting rights. Those have not passed the Senate. This and that's these Joe Biden's whole agenda has completely failed, other than a bullshit infrastructure plan and some help that is long past gone forgotten. But that thing, even the whole people who say, oh, we need to vote, even the structures that allow people to vote, they won't even protect that. They're completely selling people out to the wolves.
Right. Well, the Voting Rights Act was eviscerated before Biden got into office. And this is something that Black people have been clinging to like a lifeboat all these decades. And now it's a wrap. And Republicans get to do whatever they want. And I suppose what Democrats are doing, what they want. And it's very clear where their allegiance lies. It's not to us. It's not to the millions of people who vote for them, who never get the things that they promise. All they have left is scaremongering and fundraising. So they screw up, and Roe v. Wade is history. And what do? They have the nerve to ask for more money and say, oh, you got to vote for us to save Roe v. Wade.
Margaret, I wanted to ask your opinion on a rather a political figure in the Black political class. I find rather, I don't like the chap. Let's put it like that. Are you familiar with Bakari Sellers?
Somewhat.
Are you familiar with the fact that he is now affiliated with a political action committee that is heavily financed by, let's just say, political interests that are in bed with Israel in terms of its political actions, and is using his affiliation with that political action committee to try to neutralize candidates who are considered to be "quote unquote" progressive, i.e., Rashida Tlaib in Detroit, because of her. They're trying to claim it because that she's got a black seat, that seat should be black because it's Kanye's old seat. But we know that the reason they want to get her out is because of her alleged fealty to the cause of Palestinians, which we can question as well, being that we know how these progressives are kind of dubious in their flim-flamming also. But do you have any thoughts on gentleman Bakari and his affiliation with this political action committee, and how the black political class and its traditional acolytes are being used to really bring the guns out for the quote-unquote so-called progressives to their left?
Well, Sellers is doing. He's more obvious at doing what the rest of them do. It's selling the rest of us out, and they need these people. Occasionally, they need somebody to be as obvious as Sellers is being in working with these Zionist lobby groups. But you touched on something else about Rashida Tlaib and what she does and doesn't do for Palestine, and the other progressives don't do. They're progressives in name only, domestically, internationally. So I kind of think it's amusing that they're amassing all this money to keep people in line who are already in line. You already have a system set up which keeps true progressives from getting into office, which keeps those who may genuinely have a progressive ideology from actually accomplishing anything, because none of them are really revolutionaries, and that's what you would have to be in order to subvert these forces in congressional leadership. But I don't want to spend too much time talking about people like him. He's a representative of very rich people who already control politics. And every now and then they just, it's like a reminder that they're telling you they're the ones in charge. And they will use a Bakari Sellers or someone like him.
Ajamu, do you have anything you want to add?
Only that it's listening to Margaret making these political connections. It should be a reminder to all of your listeners that if you're not reading the Black Agenda Report, you really can't be a fully informed radical in this country. You don't have to be Black. You've got to be. I mean, where else do you go besides programs like this, where you have those kinds of political connections being made? You have to understand how all these issues connect up to each other. And that means you have to engage constant study. So, this framework that Margaret laid out is the kind of framework of understanding that we have to bring to both domestic and international politics, because both of them are, of course, fundamentally linked. And the kind of games being played by the Black misleadership class in fronting for the U.S. bourgeoisie on the African continent and globally have to be called out, because you have elements of our people and elements of the left that are providing ideological cover for what is essentially a right-wing agenda that is being pushed by the U.S. and by the what they refer to now as the collective West, which is really basically the pan-European stamps system against the rest of us. And understanding this line of demarcation, I think, is fundamentally important for how we shape and advance radical politics.
And
Thank you very much. That's very important. Go ahead, Marcus. You want to jump in?
well, yeah, and I think one of the points too, like if even just going on one of the sticking points for me with Obama is that AFRICOM was created by legislation in 2007 at the end of George Bush's term. Obama came in and physically built that entire apparatus. Going back to a point Ajamu just made, that like I lean on Black Agenda Report and their reporting on AFRICOM, and that's something that is consistently changing and developing on the whole continent in ways that is detrimental, not only to Black people, but it's also like a proven, like choice of like these, quote unquote progressives and the things that they would capitulate to, and yeah, how that is also too is like exasperating, whether it is oil markets or the eventually like climate crisis and all these types of things. Like you got the Sahel region in Africa that's like ground zero for climate crisis, and a lot of these actions are just like exacerbating with some of the different actors and whatnot. But no, I mean, I'm just kind of throwing those points into.
Margaret, I know you have to go. We can't keep you too long, but I want to ask you a quick question. What is your prognostication for the midterms, and what would you say to Black folk who need to have a more radical understanding of what electoral politics limitations are in terms of how they should proceed during the midterms?
Well, at the very least, people should look at what they've done and what they've gotten for what they've already done. As I already pointed out, this clinging to the Democrats, we have to vote for them, has obviously failed. So if people don't have any other understanding, they need to be aware that they need to stop that and think about what the limits of the electoral process, especially federally. I think people actually need to pay more attention to their state legislatures. The death of Roe v. Wade has been so vast. There are only 16 states that now guarantee the right to abortion. And the rest of them either have made it illegal or called it into question. And that is the fault of the Democratic Party for just letting the Republicans get these seats. So I would say if you want to pay attention to electoral politics, you might want to pay more attention to your state than to the federal government. And if you think it's a terrible catastrophe if the Republicans, as expected, take back the House and Senate in the midterms, just ask yourself what you've gotten when Democrats are in the majority.
Well, all right. Do you have to go at that point, or you? Oh,
I've got to jump. I'm so sorry. I can't stay with you guys. I'll just have to watch.
No,
it.
we will have. You gave us quite a bit to consider, and hopefully we can get a promise for you to come back another time when you can give us more time to talk.
I certainly will.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to sit here and wrestle with Ajamu, who's going to come out with the big Uzis, with the heavy weaponry now to intellectually drop bombs.
No. We had the bombs already dropped.
Thank you so much. Ajamu, don't play coy, man. Don't play coy. We know we got you. You were the leader of the Black Left Revolutionary Army. We understand the power that you summoned behind as the organizer of Black Alliance for Peace. Come on, man. I get the emails. I need to be making more of the meetings. But so seriously, comrade, I always enjoy talking to you. Let's talk about the international scene, if you don't mind. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to delve too quickly in there. I know I promised to give Margaret the domestic matters, but it's so rare that I can get both y'all on the same page. I was just like, man, let's screw this domestic stuff. Let's go straight to the international. But I had to put myself in check and stick to the actual agenda at hand. Right. So we have right now, let's ask a serious question. Why is the left really only alive in Latin and South America, brother? What's that about? What seriously?
Well, that's a very interesting question, a very astute question too, as a matter of fact. I would add the left is also alive in parts of Asia and even in parts of Africa. So the real question becomes, why do we have such a pathetic left in the US and Western Europe? And I think it's a very complex to try to deconstruct that. But I think part of it is, the sort of simplistic response would be that these left forces have been profoundly corrupted. There's a consequence of the materialities of living in the West, in living in the center of empire in the U.S. You had the hegemony of social democracy, and the left forces finding very creative and interesting ways to rationalize their class collaboration, and that was reflected in the limited kinds of demands they made on the capitalist state or states where they lived for the last 40, 50 years. And it also began to really manifest itself in the reactionary stances they took vis-a-vis U.S. and Western imperialism. So deconstructing that is important. On the other hand, though, in Latin America, in Asia, on the African continent, you don't have the luxury of having illusions about the possibility and prospects of social democracy and bourgeois politics and bourgeois economics, because you are getting kicked up the ass every day. You are living the contradiction of the ongoing colonial relationship, and therefore you are immersed in struggle, immersed in understanding of those conditions, those relationships. You are going through a process of intellectual decolonization, because you understand that even the radical elements of the modernization process, Marxism, Marxist-Leninism, they don't have the complete and comprehensive framework for understanding the colonial conditions you find yourself in. So you have to go back to your own experiences, your own history, and begin to pull out that submerged or repressed knowledge that you had as a consequence of your own historical experiences. And therefore you see these very, very creative constructions taking place in the global South. But primarily, now we could go back to Latin America. I think some of the most creative stuff that's being developed is in fact in Latin America. So ways of sharpening the analysis and developing a radical politics, a decolonial radical politics that translates into a deeper organization, a more sophisticated constituency, and a politics that emerges where the only way that kind of sophistication and the levels of organization we see developing in Latin America can only be checked through repression. And that's what we're seeing in parts of Latin America. So it is these material contradictions, the corruption, the privilege of the left in the northern countries, and the objective realities that people are facing in the colonial nations that I think help to account for this profound contradiction between the left in the north and left forces in the south.
Well, Ajamu, I'm glad you said that, and I agree with you in many ways. But this is the thing, though. We have seen through the post-colonial history, we've seen through this not only the actual political works, the prognostications of people like Kwame Nkrumah, Fanon, Amilcar Cabral, that these revolutions will face internal betrayal by collaborator and comprador classes that will always seek to be at the behest of the same Western imperial powers and become counter-revolutionary forces in their stead. At the same time, I agree with you that in the global South, you cannot be deluded by the niceties of capital in your politics, because you're dealing about whether or not you can eat or not, quite frankly. So those delusions become, and those contradictions become clear. What has been the consequence of the revolutionary activities that we've seen over the last 60 years, post-World War II, going back in the 60s, we're constantly internally amongst our cadre coming from these revolutionary movements, develop these compradors and collaborators who have undermined the movement of the people, who've come to a point where they are collaborating with the forces of counterinsurgency and taking us back 2 steps when we make 1 step forward. How do we deal with these contradictions when we talk about the fact that, yes, let us say that the Global South may be the center or the fulcrum of revolutionary activity in terms of radical politics, but at the same time, what is the fruit that bears from these post-colonial movements when so many of these governments end up becoming cannibalized by compradors, collaborators, and counter-revolutionary forces?
Mhm. Well, first we have to sort of differentiate those experiences that you're referring to make sure that we don't collapse certain petty bourgeois regimes that were never serious about revolutionary change from those experiments in which they have attempted to try to construct a socialist transition, but have faced not only internal challenges but also the wrath of U.S. and European imperialism. Because we have to make those differentiations because we have to then look specifically at the conditions in those national contexts. For example, we understand what has been the impact of more than 60 years of embargo against Cuba. We have to understand the attempts to undermine and subvert the experiment in Venezuela and in Nicaragua, for example. We understand what the U.S. is attempting to do in other parts of Latin America. You have, sort of social democratic governments emerging. They have nominal control state and attempting to try to address some of the material needs of their people. But then you have on the African continent, for example, a number of states that started off being committed to a socialist transformation, like in Angola and Mozambique. The promises of some elements, including the ANC in South Africa, Algeria, and then you see that they basically were derailed or derailed themselves, and they provide a very interesting kind of a frame to really look at and see what happened in terms of the class forces, class struggle, the ideological orientations of those movements. So we got to make those kinds of distinctions. And we stay with Africa, for example. One could argue that some of these attempts just weren't that serious in terms of their ability to deepen their process. You have a petty bourgeois intelligentsia, many of them educated in the West, committed to decolonization, if you will. They came back to their countries. They embraced certain aspects of radical thought, including Marxism. But there were some cultural challenges and even ideological challenges that resulted in not being able to deepen the processes in such a way where the process was embraced by the people, and the people became the protagonists, if you will, of their own liberation. So when you had these profound changes taking place in the 1990s with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the sort of ideological assault on the socialist project, it was very easy for these elites to basically sort of throw their hands up and surrender and embrace a alternative path to a national development that was essentially capitalistic and without much opposition from their peoples, because the peoples hadn't really embraced and taken on the revolutionary process for themselves. You couldn't do that in places like Cuba, for example, because the process was so deep that if the leadership would have deviated too far from where the people understood they had to go as a project, then you would have real serious internal contradictions and struggles. So, it's a complicated question, a complicated challenge, because we are dealing with, a situation where we had these nations attempting to survive in a world still controlled by international capital. And it makes it very, very complex trying to bring about.
I appreciate the candor of that. That's a very, very direct and very, very blunt answer. And I appreciate you, grabbing the bull by the horns, if you say, and you didn't dodge the question at all. And I iron sharpens iron. I'm very much glad you went there, brother. I always appreciate having you on the show because I know you can deal with them, and you can give them as well. So let's go directly to where the best in terms of Colombia. We were very happy to see what looked like a victory for the left forces in the election in Petro in Colombia. Can you talk about the organizing mechanisms that made that victory possible? What distinguishes that reality from the American electoral system, and what we can take as lessons as what we may need to implement here to try to make a real left electoral victory possible, if you will?
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a lot of lessons, but of course, very, very different conditions. And as Margaret said before she left, it's important for people to understand two things. One, that the Francia Marquez and her campaign, and then the victory of the historical pact, it didn't just drop out of the sky. That this came out of a processes of deep organizing in Colombia, years of political struggle, and a strategy that understood that, I think a fairly sophisticated strategy that understood that there were spaces that could be attained within the electoral process at different levels of the state, but that this had to be seen as just part of a strategy for the accumulation of power that goes beyond the electoral process. In other words, the same thing that some of us have been arguing for in this country for years. So basically, if participating in the parliamentary or electoral process in your particular state, your particular nation state, is the end all and be all of your politics, that's basically objectively reactionary. You're not going to transform. You're not going to even gain full control of the state. You're not going to be able to defeat the state. And we understand that in order for us to have a successful socialist transition, a socialist transformation, we've got to defeat the capitalist state. Okay, you're not going to do that through the electoral process. You can gain spaces, you can expand your power, but you have to have a process of dual power construction. But you have to have dual power and contending power. It's not just about, as some people are advocating, that you build just dual power or non-state power, and that's going to be all right. You're not going to be in confrontation with the state at some point. No, if you want full transformation, you have to understand that that's going to require a defeat of the capitalist state. So the lessons we learned is that these processes take time, that you have to have deep organization. And what you're going to see in Colombia is that because these are not candidates who just come in the candidate center sort of framework where you have these bourgeois candidates coming to the people saying, elect me and I'll set you free. Now, these candidates are connected to real constituencies, real organizations. Francia, for example, is the product of the Black community process in this country, in Colombia. I'm sitting in Colombia right now. She's a lawyer now, but she didn't go to law school until she was in her 30s. Okay, her political development, her organizational skills, everything was nurtured, cultivated in the internal processes of peace. And that's what we see as somewhat of a difference, because see, one of the things that drives me absolutely crazy is this notion in the US among so-called progressives or radicals and revolutionaries who talk about what our people can't understand, what our people would be scared of, and so you can't talk to them about capitalism. You can't name the enemy. You can't talk to them about a vision that goes beyond capitalism, talk about socialism. That our people wouldn't understand that bullshit. I'm glad I say that on this program.
Go for it, man.
Because basically, and this is not just in Colombia, but across the global South, you have movements, organizations that understand what people can learn when you basically engage in a process of dialogue, of collective learning. Okay, that people are very sophisticated, that you develop your own internal intelligentsia or organic intellectuals, if you will. All right. So you have in Colombia, you have the mid-level cadres, who can break down imperialism and capitalism and political economy and philosophy. I mean, like you see a graduate course in the U.S. And these people who never stepped foot in a classroom. Okay. But then you talk to folks in the U.S. and they talk about, people that they can understand, and we got to break it down. Oh yeah, of course you break certain things down. You have a language that's accessible, okay? But when people talk about what the people aren't really ready for, it ain't that the people ain't ready for it. You ain't ready for it, okay? You ain't doing no organizing. When you look at a place like, for example, Bolivia, when the U.S. helped to engineer that coup that stopped Evo Morales for a while, what stopped him serving out his administration. What is his base? His organizing base, his base of support in that country. It wasn't, and it's not the movement for social justice or the movement for democracy. His base, his peasant and campesino base, indigenous base, is the movement for socialism. So if you could have that kind of clear politics in Bolivia, why can't we have that in North America? We don't have it. Why? Because we don't have people who are really grounded in organizing, who have the cultural skills to be able to really develop people in that way. The layer of leadership in most of these organizations is basically petty bourgeois, and they have not done what Cabral has, informed us. What has to happen is if you're part of the petty bourgeoisie, if you elevate from the working class into the petty bourgeoisie, you got to commit class suicide. Okay, so this is the issue, the challenge we face, in my opinion, in North America. These are the kind of lessons we learned from the global South, where the center of revolutionary politics now exists. Not in the North, not among these folks with this fantasy about white boys leading a proletarian revolution in the U.S. It ain't gonna happen. Okay, when the revolutionary process intensifies in the U.S., it will be black and brown led, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
Ajamu, can you
let me ask you a question about that, Ajamu? Let me ask you a question. Do you think that we are fetishizing and essentializing the revolutionary capacity of black and brown people in light of the fact that in our 50-plus year counter-revolution, we've seen many quote-unquote radical revolutionary former comrades become worse than compradors? And should we go with the mantra that there's something particularly revolutionary about the essence of blackness or brownness that makes it more willing to be the vanguard of the revolution than anyone else? Are there material conditions that make that the case? Are we going to argue that this is some kind of magical genetic feat that makes that the case?
Yeah, no, I think that the material reality. I think when we talk about class, we talk about the African working class, the African Latino working class. We are talking about the most oppressed and most exploited workers in the country. Okay, and that provides the material basis for a potential political alignment, revolutionary alignment that could provide the kind of leadership to the white working class, those elements who are able to transcend white supremacy and to be a part of a multinational revolutionary process that's going to be under the leadership of those two forces. That provides the material base for that. So it's still this intersection between the national question and class. That basically, it has to be both, and that is the basis. We don't ascribe to any kind of magical processes. We can't afford that. We don't have that luxury. We can't engage in sort of an ideological fantasy in terms of what the conditions really are. We have to have an analysis, a sober analysis that will help us to understand both the potential advantages and the contradictions we face as a revolutionary movement, and be absolutely honest about that.
I love I love getting engaged with you in the finer details. I'm going to ask you a question. And you're a longtime radical revolutionary brother. In the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a rising phenomenon of the quote unquote democratic socialist faction of the left. They may call themselves progressives, leftists, and so on. The DSA types that have come about largely out of Occupy Wall Street and the Bernie Sanders phenomenon. Now, some will argue that this provided an ideological capacity to expand the concept of socialism and challenging capitalism and even imperialism to a larger coterie of Americans who normally would have been dead to such politics. Largely, some would argue they were mostly middle class white folk and they did not penetrate black and brown communities. Do you believe that the development of that political phenomenon was a political asset for those who may have more revolutionary left politics? Or do you think it's an obstacle in its capacity to bring forth the kind of transformative politics that are necessary to challenge the status quo? And is there a capacity to bridge the gap between these two factions, or is that something that is beyond the pale?
First, let me say that the gap that may be between these forces and what is developing or what can emerge with this kind of coalition that I just described. That of course can and will happen. But to go back to your question, the first part of it, whether or not this development should be perceived as a positive phenomenon, I've always been absolutely clear about that. Of course, it has been, and it was, because basically, what do we want as revolutionaries? We want to get access to the people. Why? We want to engage in the process of consciousness development and raising and deepen our organization, okay? But we're in competition with the bourgeoisie. And so we can't get access. We can't get to through the bourgeois media. But what you have with this phenomenon of this whole Bernie Sanders thing was that for the first time, you had a major candidate who was at least using these words, socialism. You had the emergence of this DSA that started talking about socialism and young people who are looking at this thing in a different kind of way. Now, I was never one of the ones that basically would poo-poo that, because the socialism that Bernie Sanders was advancing was some kind of view of this Nordic social democracy, okay? My whole thing was, if you understand the challenge of the day, which is an ideological challenge, the ideological struggle, your responsibility then, if the Bernie Sanders socialism is not where you think it should be, then you build on that. Here you have millions of people being exposed to this idea of this concept for the first time in their lives, okay? If it has limitations, build on that. Don't, stand back in the margins with your little marginal ass organization that can't mobilize 100 people and talking about this represents some kind of block. No, you build on it if you're an organizer. The issue we have is that we don't have that many people who know how to organize. We have people who posture and pontificate and play at this thing. Okay.
No, you're absolutely right. And I say this, and I know you've been a professional organizer. I got my political education from an organizer, Bruce Dixon. I am not an organizer. I am not trained in those skills. I've been trained by organizers, but I do realize an organizer when I see one. And one thing I say on this show, and Marcus can attest to this, Jason can attest to this, is that we have a left that does no organizing at all. And we have a left that is basically rooted in believing the fantasy of electoralism is going to save the day, when that has never worked. The only time electoralism has worked for any left in America is when it's following a movement of people who are willing to burn shit down in this country. And unless we have any type of organizing of people who are willing to do that, we will go nowhere. And that is the problem. I would love to be able to say, hey, let's go to a gymnasium in West Perrine, Florida, in the working class black neighborhood I live in, and get folk organized around let's talk about police reform. Let's talk about healthcare. Let's talk about material conditions. Wait, why can't we do that? Why can't we get DSA to work with Black Alliance for Peace, to work with Cooperation Jackson, to say, let's go in every hood in America and sit and get every gymnasium in every public school and get people. Let's have a picnic. Let's have a day parade. Let's do something where we talk to people. I am not an organizer, but I want to know why people who are not trained in this can't do something like this and motivate the left to get back into talking to working class Black, brown, and white people where they are.
If I could jump in real quick too, because I think we do have a pretty good example of this budding and happening. I think Christian Smalls with the Amazon Labor Union and some of the tactics that they utilized, and like some of they talk about going at like organizing at bus stations, giving away free things like food to weed just to be able to connect with people, discuss with grievances, and be able to like organize a labor union. What Ajamu, I'd like to ask you is, and something that I think we're kind of hitting on now, is the coalition, of entities that are necessary to come together in order to create wins. And I know that this is happening in Colombia. I think this is happening in Bolivia, where you're getting these indigenous organizations, Black organizations, and then also, just worker unions that are coming together to create that power to then inflict onto the national politics.
Well, both that your question and Pascal's comments, of course, are linked. And I would just first say this. I appreciate your commentary, Pascal, about the what appears to be the very slim examples of people engaged in organizing. But I can't go as far as you went. There are some people who are in fact trying to do some organizing. They almost have to like reinvent the wheel, if you will. But there are people who are doing some pretty decent work in various pockets around the country. Secondly, in your example of the kind of things that could be done in terms of coalitional work, it goes to your question too, Marcus. We want to be able to build coalitions, but we argue, for example, the Black Alliance of Peace, that you have to have a independently organized base to go into these coalitions. See, one of the frustrations many young Africans have encountered is they go into these multinational formations as individuals, and that are usually run by white folks. They get kicked up their ass, degraded, disrespected, and sometimes even turns them off to organization. We say you get into a formation like the Black Alliance of Peace, an independent organization, independent coalition of groups, of organizations and individuals, where you could be in a environment where there's cultivating of your skills.
Get the political education.
Political education. When we enter into coalitions, we come in with power, because at this point, many people don't know. We don't brag about it. The Black Alliance of Peace today now is the largest anti-war organization in this country. Okay, and in terms of resources, I mean, we don't get any kind of who's going to fund us in terms of these philanthropic, liberal connected organizations. We go directly to the masses of the people to raise the meager resources we have. With individual donors, dues from our membership, dues from the organizations, and so we go into these political coalitions with our own independent base. So the coalition will work. For it to be effective, you have to have an independent, organized base. One of the challenges that we have, though, in terms of building these coalitions, and this sort of what we used to talk about before Black Lives Matter, Black and Brown coalitions. Let me say something about that. Can I, real quick?
Go ahead.
Before Black Lives Matter, and I'm gonna make this connection. People might not like it. One of the processes we were involved in trying to reconstitute the left in the U.S. was recognizing that beyond the African working class, we had this Latino working class, if you will, or Latinx working class. Okay, so we based in the South. The Latinx or working class in the South and in the Southwest. And so the challenge we had was, how do we build how do we build connections? How do we build more effective work? Part of that was culminated in 2006. You remember 2006, May Day, when thousands of people came out on May Day, where in places like Atlanta, we built a black-brown coalition and turned out 80,000 people for that. And the response from the state in 2006 was massive repression directed at Latinos, because that kind of coalition was too powerful for them to deal with. Okay, so but we continue with trying to build this thing. The rise of Black Lives Matter, that conversation, those struggles we were engaging in, because you got to engage the struggles between Africans and Latinos, or Latinx people. It basically ended because the focus became on this thing called, this exclusive focus on Black folks. Now, we all center African people, Black folks, okay? But not to the detriment of building a anti-colonial opposition. What Bush was a petty bourgeois, and I hated. I didn't use the term, but identity politics, in which this petty bourgeois focus just on, and that ain't the Black working class, but on Black people. Became at one point it could have been seen as progressive, but it became a detriment. It became, in fact, reactionary. When you look at, for example, the George Floyd rebellions in 2020, as conservative as some of those things were, there was a possibility of a flip to take place. There'd be many people who came out in opposition to what happened to George Floyd. Now, of course, they were outraged by the images of watching this man being murdered, but it was a sort of a insipid understanding that we all are George Floyd, okay? That this system has its knee on our collective necks, okay? And so the pivot to a more radical politics beyond this, whatever this thing called racial justice is, or criminal reform, it had that possibility, but we didn't make that pivot, okay? So, these are the kind of politics we've got to deal with and struggle with today if we're going to go forward. Last, one of the issues we have to also deal with that emerged over the last decade or so is the popularity of this bullshit called Afro-pessimism. That basically, here we are, with this, again, I consider this to be a U.S.-centric framework in which, this issue of the fundamental anti-Blackness of basically all human beings, it's utter nonsense. And it's not even geared toward looking at the racism or white supremacy of white folks, but it has us looking at supposedly white supremacist ideas and attitudes among other colonized people. Now, we understand that we are subjected to the colonial project and the white supremacist ideology from that. So we all internalize, everybody, degrees of white supremacist ideology, okay? But instead of engaging these navel-gazing, torturous conversations around, the white supremacist ideology, we got to figure out what other elements can we, in fact, build effective coalitions to confront the enemy that is shaping and directing all of our lives, okay? And so, well, you can't do that when you're looking at this Latino individual and wondering how racist they may be. So the focus not on white folks, but on other colonized people, to me, is one of the most creative developments since they developed this thing called humanitarian intervention. So this is some of the ideological confusion we have to deal with.
We had a whole show trying to deconstruct Afro-pessimism, and it went well. We had a gentleman who wrote an article talking about it, and we got excoriated by comrades as well for trying to take it on. And I'm the whole concept of Afro-pessimism, saying that Black people are eternally enslaved, it offends my Haitian ancestry to even hear this kind of discourse coming out of people. This the ontological nature. I mean, it's so, man. The stuff is just so. It could be a psyop. It's so just demoralizing, man.
Some people even think that.
But no, but you bring this up, people are like, oh, you're just denying race. I was like, yo, man, stop it. Why are you giving these white people so much power, man?
Exactly. What kind? You would think it'd be a joke for someone to say that the psychic structure of a Tibetan a peasant is dependent on anti-blackness.
Yes.
What kind of nonsense is that? But people take that shit seriously. Yeah. So yeah. Come after me. Ajamu said Afro-pessimism is reactionary bullshit.
I'm telling you, man. Listen, man, we don't even have to revisit that, brother. I'm glad. I'm glad.
I think we just did. I think it has been revisited. We're on the flight home. It's the flag's there.
But John, let me tell you right now. I always love talking to you, brother, because we agree on many things, we disagree on others, but we always cordial when we do. And you always like, yo, Pascal, you on some bullshit. If you think I'm on some bullshit, you say at the drop of time, and you won't hold back. But I always appreciate engaging with you and having you on, man. We got to get you on This Is Revolution more often, man, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, if I can take it back to kind of like organizing, because I think you're not only saying some like just delivering some good work on Black Alliance for Peace, but also describing how other communities, what is the importance of creating your own organization, having that power, and then entering in a coalition. I guess like my question is, how do you determine that? What are some of the metrics that you decided on, I guess maybe as an organization, to say, we need to have these structures internally built and strengthened before we can even start talking to other groups and trying to, work with them?
Well, good question, and I'm gonna have to jump in 7 minutes. Yeah, we determined when we launched the Black Alliance for Peace that we were going to, and everything we did was strategic. We could have named this thing the Black Alliance for Revolutionary Change or whatever. We said Black Alliance for Peace, and we did that strategically because we constructed, we embraced what we saw as the Black radical peace tradition, which is different from other traditions. The Black radical peace tradition is a tradition that says that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the winning by the people through struggle of all of the structures of oppression. Okay, so it's a structural analysis. It says that you can't have peace as long as you have the continuation of imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, etc. Okay, and so we also said too, we want to have Black Alliance of Peace because as we build this thing out, Black Alliance of Peace will get us into some places, some spaces we couldn't get if we were the Black Revolutionary Front. Okay, so it'll get us in Reverend Chicken Wing's church, which it did. All right, and while we might not have got Reverend Chicken Wing to join with us, we got members of his congregation who dutifully, many of them, send their $5 a month to Black Alliance for Peace. Okay, so we understood we had to build a foundation. So we started with a few organizations and some individuals. The key was supposed to be organizations, but sometimes history you can't control what the historical need is. So while we systematically moved building organizations to build an independent base to revive the Black radical tradition, Black radical anti-war and anti-imperialist tradition, as part of what we saw as the need for trying to construct a more effective Black left unity process. As we started building that, individuals started coming to us. So that basically now, while we have 38 organizations as our base, we have over 600 individual members. Okay, and that poses its own kind of dynamics and challenges. So the key, though, was our principles of unity, our commitment to independent organization, our commitment to radical politics. It's in our principles of unity, anti-capitalism, anti-patriarchy, et cetera, and our fierce determination that we're going to have a internal process in which people could cultivate their politics. that we are not going to have any kind of, we weren't going to sugarcoat what we're up against. We have unambiguous language, and we're going to run away from the tough issues. And therefore, that's why, people would talk about us being tankies and all this kind of crap. We don't even mind. We don't care, And so that's the sort of the strategy that we use as we built this thing out over just 5 years, But, this here, you have this radical and important formation, but, we ain't getting you ain't seeing us on the covers of magazines and all this kind of stuff, because this isn't controlled opposition. This is real opposition.
Well, let me tell you, Ajamu, after starting This is Revolution podcast, after coming on with Jason and doing this, I did two things. I realized that I had to be involved in political organizations, and I joined two, and I'm still a member of two. One was DSA, and the other was Black Alliance for Peace. And I've definitely not regretted my membership in Black Alliance for Peace. I need to be more active. I'm not as much as I should be. I'm trying to promote the show.
Are you paying your dues? Are you paying your dues?
I pay my dues. My dues are paid. I'm a dues-paying member. That is correct.
It's like that's all you need. You're in good standing. You know what I'm saying? Your dues paid? Right. All right. Hey, yo.
Jason Miles.
Yeah, speaking of paying dues.
There's Jason Miles from
Jason. Hello.
Man, Ajamu's going to get us in all kinds of trouble with them people again.
Jason, we'll be all right, man. We're all right, man. We got Ajamu comes with big guns, man.
Yeah, Ajamu's going to get us canceled again. We're going to get in so much trouble. But I'm here.
Well, I'm already in
all the trouble.
Yes, definitely. They get in contact with me. They threaten me.
All right, we got to go.
They threaten you? All right, look, they threaten you?
Yeah, I get all kind of death threats and stuff. Yeah, I don't talk about it.
People?
For what?
From the Afro-pessimist people?
No. I'm talking about just in general, just people who. Oh
no, Jason's talking about the Afro-pessimists, and they gonna.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I ain't worried about that.
But yeah, as I was saying, is that I joined Black Alliance for Peace, and it's always being on that list server. That's the email I look forward to the most, and being able to be in commune with revolutionary comrades who are definitely looking to change the way things work and build a better future is something I appreciate very much, and I'm glad to be working with both of those organizations, but definitely Black Alliance for Peace. And I'm just saying that we got to build like Voltron, man. Why don't we just take over DSA? I'm just saying, we are, instead of just complaining about this organization, I say, why can't there be a Black Alliance for Peace takeover of some local DSA chapters? We need to take that revolutionary Black Alliance for Peace energy and sprinkle it around in some chapters of the Democratic Socialists of America, man, and radicalize these formations.
Well, I mean, that can happen. That's a local decision. Because we have citywide alliances across the country, and now we have regional structures, as you know. So how they interact with local formations is really up to them. But you're right. Once we go into these formations, because of the nature of our cadre, we tend to have a lot of influence.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I like to see Black Alliance for Peace, Cooperation Jackson, Kali Kuno come together and take these DSA chapters and really create that kind of radical multiracial alliance with legacy Black movement organizers who are about no compromise, no retreat, and formulate a real left politics in this country.
Yes, let's keep on talking about that. But my brothers, I'm going to have to jump. I wish I could stay longer.
Be here. Thank you.
I appreciate for coming on such short notice.
Yes.
Please come on again.
Definitely. I'm whenever whenever you call, I'm gonna be there. So hey.
All right, brother.
Let me know. All right, Marcus. Thank you so much.
All right, peace, gentlemen. Thank you.
Okay. Right, so how do I get out of here?
Just leave.
There you go.
There you go.
Which, Pascal, I don't know how we always stumble onto this, but like we always end up hitting on like real key organizing I don't know, tactics, techniques, overviews. But spiciness. I think some of the stuff that Ajamu was saying is incredibly important. Some of the, as far as like, how do you build power?
I didn't know what we were going to get into coming into today. I was like, these are my people. Black Agenda Report is my old publishing home. But this was a great show, brother.
Yeah.
I think Margaret was hitting it out the park. I think Ajamu was hitting out of the park. We asked some hard questions. We challenged some ideas, and he came with the real stuff. And I was really glad to hear him put the marker on the table about what he thought about the DSA Progressive Sanders faction and what he thought their contribution or lack thereof was. And he was very, very direct and to the point about it, man. And I'm glad. I think this is one for the records, brother.
Yeah. And I think, like one of those things is like, and I really find it important. It's like, don't let your critique of another organization ruin you picking up from where it was is left off.
Listen, man, this is what I love about Ajamu. Was Ajamu and I may have disagreements, and I think we realize that. But I respect him. I respect his overall political goals. I respect him as an organizer. And I respect what he's achieved politically, and I think he has some modicum of respect for me. And that doesn't depreciate our ability to work with each other. And I think that today, because everyone's doing everything was behind the keyboard and online, we don't build the kind of trust in dealing with each other as human beings. I've met Ajamu. I've seen him speak at panels, And of course, one of the benefits of me having been trained by people like Bruce Dixon and Glenn Ford is that you get to work with like stalwart organizers who've been in this game for a long time and see them up close. And I mean, it's just it's amazing, man. And I think that he dropped some gems today that really can listen. Why can't we have Black Alliance for Peace, DSA, Cooperation Jackson, Kali Akuno, the Black Radicalists, instead of bickering at each other? Why can't we work together and create a serious multiracial left politics that's based on organizing and challenging all these formations and get out of this morass of electoralism and actually work on organizing people around a serious politics? That's what needs to happen.
Well, and that's something that that's where you really see the possibilities, and that's where and I'm happy you hit it over and over again of any of the wins in South America, while these are electoral wins they're celebrating, it nowhere it didn't start as just oh, hey, let's just canvass, knock doors, vote for this one person, and that's it and that's all. It took decades of work, organizing, development, community development, and then assembling them, like you said it, assembling like Voltron to come and then actually start delivering blows. And it's possible, and that's one thing too, is that if you just focus on what's happening bad, you may get a very, very dark picture of reality. But I think, revolutionary optimism is that's where that's necessary. Of just saying these things are possible.
What does M. Toussaint think about the show, man? We got to get her opinion. M. Toussaint, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, I thought today was one of our best of episodes, for sure. It's up there. Do you feel the energy? Do you feel the energy?
I feel it. Yeah.
I asked the chat what they thought, and they said, yes. You see all the ones in the chat? That means they agree with me. They say that this is one of the best. I feel like we got to the root of some serious issues and even came up with some suggestions of how to move forward.
Yeah.
Huge.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I'd say, for me, when Ajamu was just put the point on creating your own strong organization before,
exactly. Listen,
such a good point.
We talked about this on the show before, how sometimes kids from communities of color who may not be used to organizing, they go in these spaces where it's DSA, it's majority white, and they may feel alienated. They may feel like they are not being respected. Why don't you get your political education in a Black Alliance for Peace or Cooperation Jackson if you feel you need to have more ethnic bona fides or cooperation with people who are from your community that can bolster your kind of security in your Black political education as well as your political education overall, give you the skills where you can now move into a multiracial faction, a coalition, and build a multiracial coalition. Because I can understand in seeing in organizations in DSA and dealing with people who come out of the Democratic Socialist kind of Sanders faction, I see how some people may perceive them as being racially tone deaf. how certain publications like Jacobin may seem like they, for some folk, that they are not quote unquote in line with their understanding of race. Well, we've got to get over that. We've got to engage each other with all of our issues and baggage and come to a place where we don't make our disagreements become obstacles to us working politically. And we have to understand when we don't have the worst intentions for each other. None of us want to be either perceived as or either be closet racist. And if we do, we should be called out about it. And we should be able to come together with a language and a politics where we are challenging the status quo without trying to step on each other's toes. None of us are powerful enough to be acting like we get it all right.
Yeah, no, and I mean, like I agree 100%. And that's something that's like, if you and that we, I think there's one to have an understanding of where we're going. There needs to be each organization or any coalition, like you need to have a concrete, solid, diamond solid understanding of where you are going. What are the goals? What is the of this organization, and then making sure that you have that understanding that it's like, if there are people wearing your same uniform and marching in the same direction, you cannot treat them like enemies and shit, right? Like there's just ways you fucking deal with cadre that and Twitter and all this social media and shit like that. Like, you just got to dead that shit and be adults. But this is stuff that the concrete stuff's going to come in real life, working in real life.
No, absolutely, man. This was another one. But yeah, when you and me, Marcus, come together, we have these shows like Voltron, and Jason's always like, "Oh man, I missed this one."
Yep,
yeah. He popped in with Phoenix. I'm glad to see you having a good time. Jason, I'm glad to see you having a good time with Phoenix, man. Enjoy your time with your son. That's important, for sure. But no, this episode was definitely at the park. I think we can wrap it up because we can definitely
which we're not. I'm gonna leave it. Like, we didn't even really talk about the horrible week for prime ministers. Boris is leaving. Shinzo Abe get got.
We talked about Boris.
Oh, okay. And then in Sri Lanka, I don't know if you saw that the prime minister there just stepped down, I think, as we were going live and stuff. So things are happening across the world. Movements are happening. Get out in your community, people. Let's do this thing.
So on Tuesday, we're going to have David Griscom coming on. He will be coming on as a guest on Tuesday, and on Thursday we will have Dan Mello for coming on as well. So we're going to have a fun-filled "This Is Revolution" podcast for you throughout the weekend through the month of July. We're going to have some special guests trying to cook up for us coming on in August. We got someone in particular that I'm thinking about. We look forward to. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. And I think it's safe to say, Marcus, we are out.